At 16:12 and 08 seconds, SPY-6 radar aboard USS Bulkley detects 13 inbound contacts east of the Gerald Ford, and every defensive system in the formation turns toward a picture that looks dangerous enough to be real and simple enough to be wrong. One sea-skimming cruise missile is driving in at 872 kilometers per hour, altitude 9 meters above the water, bearing 084, range 167 kilometers. 12 one-way attack drones are spread behind it in 2 loose cells at 1,400 meters and 1,900 meters altitude, all converging on the same anchored carrier. The Aegis combat system begins processing 13 contacts exactly the way doctrine expects, assigning the cruise missile to the outer layer and the drones to the follow-on defensive sequence. The system was designed to defend a maneuvering carrier with full air operations and an intact escort screen, and not a supercarrier under repair, anchored in open water with temporary power gear hanging off its starboard side and only 2 destroyers covering the approach. USS Gerald Ford has 11 minutes and 29 seconds before the first visible contact reaches lethal range. What nobody in Combat Information Center understands yet is that the visible contact is not the real attack. Lieutenant Commander Aaron Pike on Gerald Ford's Tactical Action Watch sees the inbound cruise missile, checks the range, checks the bearing, and begins the intercept sequence without hesitation because this part is familiar. The carrier has fought missiles before. The destroyers have killed drones before. The geometry is bad because Ford is stationary, but it is still geometry the Navy understands. The air picture is narrow. The raid axis is clean. USS Mitcher, north of the carrier, begins building the first SM-2 fire control solution at 16:12 and 14 seconds. Bulkley to the east prepares a second shot 2 seconds later. On Gerald Ford itself, Lieutenant Maya Bennett in repair control is not looking at the eastern sector at all. She is looking at a small diagnostic display tied to the temporary electromagnetic launch system power rig mounted 68 meters off the carrier's starboard quarter, and she feels the same thing she felt 31 hours earlier when she filed her second warning report and watched it disappear into the routine traffic of a ship too busy to believe that a repair signature could become a targeting beacon. To understand this, you need to understand what Gerald Ford is and what Gerald Ford is not at 16:12 that afternoon. She is not conducting combat flight operations. She is not launching a full air wing. She is not maneuvering with the freedom of a carrier at war speed in the Arabian Sea. She is anchored 43 nautical miles south of Crete with 1 catapult isolated, 1 power conversion module removed, and a floating maintenance platform designated Atlas III, secured off her starboard side by 3 heavy umbilicals and 2 access bridges. Atlas III is not a warship. It is a repair platform carrying high-voltage load banks, spare power electronics, and coolant systems needed to run electromagnetic launch diagnostics while Gerald Ford remains afloat. The carrier can still fight if it must. It cannot simply cut away and sprint clear in under a minute. More importantly, the carrier itself does not need Atlas III to stay afloat. But it does need Atlas III to restore the launch system that allows it to return to full strike operations. Destroy Atlas III and Gerald Ford does not sink. It stays wounded, fixed in place for weeks, with its flight deck available only in limited mode and its combat value cut at the exact moment the United States needs every carrier it has. That is the logic of the attack. Iran did not need to blow a hole through the hull. Iran needed to turn repair into immobility. The cruise missile and the drones approaching from the east are dangerous, but not because they are likely to destroy the carrier by themselves. They are dangerous because they force every radar, every fire control officer, every bridge watchstander, and every defensive instinct in the formation to look away from the one place nobody expects the real strike to come from, the starboard maintenance sector inside the carrier's own work area, the one place cluttered with scaffolding, cables, support craft, and the floating platform that makes Gerald Ford look less like a warship and more like an engineering site. Maya Bennett is not an air defense officer. She is not in command of a destroyer, and she is not standing in front of the main tactical display calling out missile ranges. She is the ship's electromagnetic launch systems integration officer, 10 years into a career spent around power conversion cabinets, pulse storage modules, thermal loads, and the kind of engineering paperwork people only notice when something breaks. 3 days earlier, on the first morning of the repair period, she noticed a pattern no one else cared about. Every time the support launch Aegean Resolve crossed the southern maintenance lane on its contracted route between the carrier and the civilian logistics ship handling spare modules, Atlas III's field monitors registered a spike in background magnetic noise lasting 1.2 seconds. Not a surge, not a fault, a measurement event. The first one hit at 9:11, the second at 10:04, then 10:57, then 11:50, then 12:43. 53-minute intervals, exact to within 4 seconds for 11 consecutive passes. Random harbor traffic does not keep that kind of time. Civilian launches do not pass a repair platform at perfect intervals while its magnetic signature is under measurement. Thus, Bennett filed her first report that afternoon with a plain conclusion. Someone was mapping the electromagnetic output of Atlas III during catapult load bank tests. The response came back logged and noted. The second report went in after 24 more hours of data with the same 53-minute interval and the same 1.2-second sampling spikes, logged and noted again. On the morning of day 3, Bennett stopped thinking about random interference and started thinking about targeting logic. Atlas III was not just radiating power, it was radiating a unique power signature, one that only existed because Gerald Ford was under repair. If an attacker wanted to build a passive homing weapon that ignored radar and ignored decoys and went straight to the one vulnerable support asset attached to the carrier, the easiest way to do it would be to teach the seeker what Atlas III sounded like electrically. She wrote that assessment at 0814, attached the interval chart, the bearing of each pass by Aegean Resolve, and one sentence that mattered more than every other line in the report. If Atlas III's signature has been profiled, the support platform can be used as a beacon. The paper was forwarded. It was not acted on. At 16:12 and 26 seconds, while Bulkley finalizes its engagement on the inbound cruise missile, Bennett sees a new input on Atlas III's close-in maintenance grid. Not radar, not sonar in the naval sense. A vibration alert from the intake protection frame mounted under the floating platform, a sensor designed to warn engineers if debris or loose hardware is drifting toward the coolant inlets. The contact is approaching from bearing 219 at 38 knots and accelerating. Range 2,400 meters, too fast for drift, too low for radar certainty, too close to the platform to be part of the eastern raid. Bennett pulls the maintenance camera feed and sees almost nothing, just a low wake and a narrow thermal line inside the clutter of tugs, scaffolds, and mooring shadows. Then she understands what the system believed was happening and what was actually happening were two different things. The missile from the east is the thing the formation is supposed to shoot. The thing moving up from the southwest is the thing Iran actually expects to hit. At 16:12 and 31 seconds, USS Mitcher fires the first SM-2 at the sea-skimming missile. 6 seconds later, Bulkley fires its own. The cruise missile is still 154 kilometers out. You're still the correct target on the screen, still forcing the formation to spend attention where doctrine says attention belongs. Bennett picks up the circuit to Gerald Ford's Combat Information Center and tells Pike she has an unidentified high-speed surface contact closing on Atlas III from the maintenance sector. Pike acknowledges, marks it for verification, and tells her to stand by. That is not negligence. It is priority sorting. The carrier has a known cruise missile inbound, 12 drones behind it, and 2 destroyers already mid-engagement. A maintenance officer calling in a possible surface contact in the cluttered work zone is not, at first sound, the biggest problem on the ship. At 16:12 and 49 seconds, Bennett looks again. The contact is now at 1,950 meters and 41 knots. The thermal line is stronger. The wake is cleaner. She zooms one more increment and sees exactly what she had described in her ignored assessment. A low-profile, unmanned surface craft with almost no deck height, no visible navigation lights, and a nose fairing shaped like a passive seeker housing, not pointed at Gerald Ford's hull, pointed at Atlas III. Iran had not built the weapon to defeat the carrier's defenses. Iran had built the weapon to make the carrier defend the wrong thing. At 16:13 and 02 seconds, the first SM-2 reaches the cruise missile and detonates 27 meters off the target. The missile loses part of its starboard wing, rolls, and continues inbound with reduced speed. The second SM-2 misses cleanly after the damaged missile dips into sea clutter and reappears 4 seconds later on a lower profile. The visible threat is still alive. The real threat is now 1,600 meters from Atlas III and closing in 93 seconds. Bennett calls again, this time not to CMIC, but to Repair Control Central and the damage control officer on the starboard repair deck. Her order is specific because she has already thought through the problem for 31 hours. Prepare emergency ghost load transfer. Dump 80% field signature to test float Bravo. Disconnect Atlas III on my mark. Test float Bravo is a calibration raft moored 122 meters farther off the starboard quarter, normally used to absorb simulated pulse loads during EMALS diagnostics without risking the main platform. It is not designed as a decoy. Bennett intends to turn it into one. The reason the idea works is simple. A passive homing surface drone does not care where the carrier hull is if the target it was taught to find is the temporary power signature of Atlas III. Move that signature and the drone follows the energy, not the ship. The difficulty is time. Ghost load transfer is not a combat drill. It is a maintenance procedure. If done slowly, it takes 6 minutes. Bennett has 84 seconds. At 16:13 and 17 seconds, Pike finally gets visual confirmation from the starboard maintenance camera and understands that the surface contact is real. He orders a .50 caliber team to the starboard catwalk and diverts one of Gerald Ford's close-in optical mounts toward the repair sector. But the geometry is awful. Atlas III, the access bridges and the support cranes block a clean firing lane. The carrier is under repair. The support structure that keeps the ship functional is also shielding the attacker from the weapons that could stop it. At 16:13 and 24 seconds, Gerald Ford's electronic warfare suite begins soft kill measures against the drones. But Bennett does not want jamming. She wants the platform to go electrically dark in one place and loud in another. She begins the load transfer manually from the engineering console, bypassing 2 interlocks that exist to protect equipment during normal maintenance. 80% of Atlas III's field signature begins bleeding through the bus line toward test float Bravo. If the bus arcs, Bravo burns. If the timing slips, Atlas III keeps enough signature to remain the primary target. At 16:13 and 31 seconds, the unmanned surface craft is at 1,080 meters. The .50 caliber team fires its first burst and misses because the line of fire is cut by the second access bridge. 1 round strikes the rail. The rest walk harmlessly across the water beyond the contact. At 16:13 and 39 seconds, the damaged cruise missile from the east enters Bulkley's inner envelope. Bulkley fires one USS Gerald Ford begins turning its starboard phalanx toward the eastern threat because that missile is now 41 seconds from the carrier. The system is doing exactly what it should do against the thing it can see. Bennett continues the transfer. Atlas III is down to 38% of original field output. Bravo rises to 61%. The surface drone wobbles 4 degrees right, corrects, then turns another 7 degrees toward Bravo. That is the first proof she is right. The seeker was not tracking the hull. It was tracking the repair signature. At 16:13 and 52 seconds, the USS misses the damaged cruise missile by 11 meters. The target remains inbound. Phalanx on Gerald Ford opens on the eastern contact 6 seconds later. The stream cuts across the missile's flight path and detonates the warhead 312 meters off the carrier's bow. Fragments slash into the water and minor shrapnel damages one weather antenna, but the hull is untouched. The deck crews in the repair sector barely notice because they are looking at a different countdown. The unmanned surface craft is now 540 meters from Atlas III, 19 seconds from impact if Bennett has failed, 27 seconds from test float Bravo if she has not. At 16:14 and 04 seconds, Bennett gives the mark. The starboard deck team blows the quick disconnects on Atlas III's 3 power umbilicals, 2 separate cleanly. The third hangs for 3 seconds before snapping free under tension. Atlas III drops electrically silent. Test float Bravo takes the full ghost load, its field output spiking to 94% of Atlas III's original signature. The unmanned surface craft turns hard, 23 degrees to starboard, directly away from the carrier and toward the empty raft. It is now committed to the wrong target. At 16:14 and 11 seconds, an MH-60R already alert on Bulkley lifts, with orders to kill the surface drone before it reaches Bravo. The helicopter crew does not have time for a long setup. The contact is 310 meters from the raft and still accelerating. Bennett watches it on the maintenance camera, a line of wake cutting across the gap where Atlas III had been glowing like a beacon 7 seconds earlier. Now at 16:14 and 19 seconds, the Seahawk fires one AGM-114 Hellfire from 2.2 nautical miles. The missile hits 0.8 seconds before the drone reaches the raft. The detonation tears the craft open 146 meters short of Bravo. The blast wave damages the raft's instrumentation and shreds its outer frame, but the carrier is clear. Atlas III is dark, and the starboard repair sector does not burn. That should have been the end of the immediate crisis. It is not, because Iran had built the attack in layers. At 16:14 and 27 seconds, Bulkley's radar picks up the first of the drones, entering terminal dive. The cruise missile was the headline. The surface drone was the kill mechanism. The aerial drones are there to keep the formation overloaded for another 90 seconds while the hidden layer either succeeds or fails. Mitcher and Bulkley split the drone stream with ESSM and gunfire. Gerald Ford's portside phalanx takes the nearest pair at 16:14 and 39 seconds. One drone detonates 420 meters out. Another breaks apart at 310. 4 more are killed by Bulkley. 2 fall into the water after jamming corrupts their guidance. The last 4 keep coming until 16:15 and 18 seconds, when Mitcher's 5-inch gun destroys the final surviving contact 1.6 nautical miles east of the carrier. 13 visible threats had come in from the east. None hit the ship. The one hidden threat from the southwest came closest to deciding the day. At 16:15 and 31 seconds, the American response stops being reactive and becomes intelligent. Bennett is not done. She knows the surface drone did not invent Atlas III's signature by itself. Someone mapped it. Someone guided the drone into the maintenance sector under cover of the missile and drone raid. She already has the answer. The 53-minute interval passes by Aegean resolve. The 1.2-second sampling spikes, the exact bearing of each transit through the southern maintenance lane. She overlays that history with the drone's approach vector and finds the control source not on the eastern raid axis, but on a civilian-registered service vessel 18 nautical miles southwest of the carrier, the same vessel that had provided spare electrical fittings on day 1 and fresh coolant canisters on day 2. The ship's manifest says contractor support. Bennett's data says targeting relay. At 16:16 and 04 seconds, she transmits the vessel's position, the emission pattern, and the field sampling timeline to Rear Admiral Lucas Mercer aboard Gerald Ford and to the USS George H.W. Bush carrier strike group operating 392 kilometers east in the Mediterranean. The hidden logic of the attack becomes obvious in one sentence. Iran used a visible raid to pin the escorts east, while a passive homing explosive boat attacked the repair platform from inside the work sector, guided by a contractor vessel that had spent 3 days profiling the platform's electromagnetic signature. Rear Admiral Alexis Walker aboard George H.W. Bush receives the package at 16:16 and 41 seconds. She looks at the timing chart. She looks at the attack geometry. She authorizes the strike at 16:17 and 09 seconds.